Okay, I think that we are live. Let me know if you can hear me. Still a little bit confused by the setup here, but I think I did everything right. So while I wait for somebody to confirm that you can see me, I'm just going to do a build. Oh, that's good. Hello everybody. Hello folks. Or should I say, well, hello friends. Cool. And hopefully we have a little bit better stream quality today. I did mess it up a little bit last time, not realizing that I could increase it. And yes, indeed, sparkling water. I just made it myself and I put a little too much sparkle in it, so it keeps ASMRing in the cup there. But just a second, it'll stop. So welcome to this week's SerenityOS office hours. We are going to continue with the same concept as we did last week, where you can just bring any technical questions about Serenity, and we will talk about them and investigate. And really, it's up to you what you want to look into. And I have compiled a small FAQ of things that came up over and over again in previous streams. So it's on my github.io/FAQ. Right up here. It's also in a pinned comment in the chat. And if you have questions, then I recommend that you check this list first, because these questions come up over and over and over again. And I don't mind talking about these things. It's just that we try to keep it interesting for everybody by coming up with new topics. So let's see what we got here. Ruslan says, greetings from Ukraine. Do you plan to implement high-resolution fonts for Serenity or allow users to set third-party fonts in TTF? Well, we absolutely want to support that. We already do, actually. So we have a TTF library. It's called libttf, and it's doing the thing again where it's the wrong size when I start. So we already support TrueType fonts. And I think we actually, this was maybe one of the first questions we had last time. But yeah, so the system comes with one TTF font that is homemade, and it's perhaps not the most beautiful font in the world, but we can certainly use it for testing the TTF library. And the fact that the system uses bitmap fonts by default is just because I like the way they look. And also, I guess, because making a new vector font is difficult. Let's see. Dither8 says, hey Andreas, do you prefer Patreon or GitHub sponsors? So I just say use whatever you like to use. But in terms of like raw data, I can tell you that GitHub sponsors takes no cut, and they just give the money directly to the person you're sponsoring, whereas Patreon takes a percentage. That matters to some people, so it's good to know. Okay, so Biapi says, could you explain a bit the badge interface? It seems an interesting API, but I'm not familiar with the concept. Yes, absolutely. So let me show you how that works. So let's make a test program. We'll call it foo.cpp. Did that not show up in the thing? Oh, wrong directory. So if you have a badge, let's include that. And the badge is for situations where you have some class that has some interesting private interface. So say that you have a cool class that does a bunch of cool public APIs. And it also has some interesting internals. Maybe many of them. And then you have a second class, other class, that wants to access these internals in the cool class. But let's say that we do stuff to cool. And then you want to do something on this cool here, but all you can do is call the cool public API, right? Because he's not your friend. And if you, oh, the microphone is blocking the light. Yeah, it does do that. I'm a little bit cramped with the space situation in here, but we try to make it work. So yeah, so the thing is, you want to call something on this class right here from the other class, but you don't want to make it a friend, because if you were to make other class a friend of cool class, then suddenly other class can touch all of these private parts here, and you don't necessarily want somebody else to touch all your private parts. So what you want to do is you want to say, well, maybe we can have something that only other class specific API. So only other classes allowed to call this API, and it will do something internal, right? And the way that you protect this API so that nobody else can call it is that you make it take a badge. So you do this, and by doing this, you prevent anybody else other than other class from calling this API. And the way that works is that the badge template can only be constructed by the template argument class. So unless you are other class, you cannot instantiate this type of badge. And in order to call this API, all you would have to do is just pass in the badge like that, default constructed. You can also do this if you like, the more verbose way of doing it. But in our code base, we typically just do this. So I hope that makes sense, but in case you want to have a textual description of it, I do have a post on my blog here called Serenity C++ Patterns, the badge. And here you can get sort of a description of what I just told you, but less thrown together, more calculated examples. Okay. So let's see, Jewel asks, I think you previously mentioned a build setup for using Serenity libraries outside of Serenity, but I cannot remember what it was called. Is there documentation for that? Yes, so that's what we call Lagom, and it's in the meta directory, so meta Lagom. And here is a CMake list that, if built, it will build a copy of many of the Serenity libraries for your host machine. And it's part of what we use when you build Serenity. We use this thing to build some of our code generators and other stuff that we need during the build process. And there's a README about it. Let me go and find that. And if it would load. So meta Lagom has a README, so you can read what it's all about, how to build it. And the README focuses a lot on fuzzing, because that's what we use it for, at least almost primarily, I would say, outside of the helping in the build. So we fuzz the system on the OSS fuzz infrastructure, and there we're running on Linux machines as far as I know, and this is how we build the fuzzers. Let's see. Yeppy says, by the way, does Serenity still use C++ 17 or is it C++ 20? So we're using some C++ 20 features already, and we will make use of more of them as they become available in compilers. A lot of the really interesting C++ 20 stuff like modules is not mature yet, so we're not using that. But certainly when it becomes available, we will use that. Air Hogan asks, what keyboard are you using? Oh man, I should have added that one to the FAQ. This is a Logitech K740. This guy right here. This is the Swedish promo page. Maybe there's an ENUS. Right, the illuminated keyboard, K740. It's nice and quiet. Let's see. I'm going to add that to the FAQ because people often ask me about the keyboard because they say it sounds nice. And it does sound nice. That's the reason that I chose it primarily. Let's see. Dylan says, does the badge have any kind of overhead? Wouldn't passing it as argument eat a register or similar? So yeah, that is one drawback of the badge pattern, is that sometimes you do that. It is a performance concern that you're losing a register to a badge. What you can do is you can have an inline helper that looks like this, and then it would call sort of the out of line version of this. And then this thing would be a private function that is implemented somewhere somehow. And then because the compiler can see this, it will inline the thing and get rid of the badge entirely because it does nothing, right? So that's a technique. Let's see. Melissa says, why is your system named QNCBS? Aha. So it is named after the people who donated the parts to me so that I could build this system. So that is Quaker, Namshubbed, Charlie something 55, Valtteri, and Spencer. Those are the folks who donated the parts. And it was a while ago now, but basically what happened was early last year, somebody made a thread on the SerenityOS subreddit saying we should get some parts together and build a better machine for MJS, because my machine that I was using back then was really, really slow. And these people, they actually managed to get parts together and send them to me. And where is the thread? Computer hardware donation for Serenity development. This one right here by Charlie Horse 55. So I was just missing the horse. And yeah, they sent it to me, and then I assembled it later and posted here somewhere, wherever that was. I know I had a picture of it. Okay, well, I feel like I scrolled by it at some point. Regardless, that's the reason for the name. So let's see. Andrew Castor says, ignoring CI test runs as a use case for Lagom. That's true. We also use Lagom for the continuous integration, and that is certainly an important use case. Gurkirat says, any reasons why using Mate but not KDE? I just use Mate because I like it. Let's see. And here's Quaker, Quaker763, who is the Q in QNCBS. Thank you, Quaker, for the donated parts. Very, very nice. I really appreciate it. Let's see. Ryder Hitchhike says, Duxie was nice too. Yeah, Duxie was nice, but Duxie was not equipped to handle what Serenity has become. It used to be good enough, but it was basically an Intel NUC machine, like one of these little fellas, and it was fine for the first 1,000 files of SerenityOS C++, but then it got like a little too big, so I wanted to expand. Let's see. Oh, have we lagged out? I hope not. Okay, so here's the question. I don't know how to pronounce this name, sorry. Is it... What do you think about new C++ features? Are they good or do more harm in long run? As far as I understand, just trying to look some more modern languages like JavaScript. I think some of the new C++ features are very good. I think especially if modules becomes as good as it sounds, then I think that's going to be a fantastic thing for the language. Build times have always been a huge issue for C++ projects, and it's very often because of include explosion. And if modules can help with that, I think that's fantastic. But I do also observe that the people who make the C++ language are focusing a lot on like library improvements, which I personally don't care about because I don't use the standard library. And maybe I wish that they would spend their time on the language, like the core language, instead of coming up with new containers. But it's not up to me to decide what they do. And I'm sure that they have good reason to focus where they focus. So let's see. Arjun says, how can someone new to the Serenity project approach it for contributing without looking stupid? Well, you're not going to look stupid approaching it for the first time. Everybody comes in not knowing exactly what to do. And the best way to approach it is by just using it. And this is what I tell everybody. So just build a system, use it for a bit, until something bothers you, and then try to fix or improve whatever bothers you. This has been how everybody got into it, and it continues to be the best entry point, I think. And when it comes to like interacting with the community and the GitHub project and stuff like that, just read we have a extensive contributing contribution guidelines document, which you can find in the repository root, right here, contributing.md. And this lays out in excruciating detail how our contribution process works. But if you have any questions and something is unclear, you can always come to the Discord server and speak with the community and get help with your thing. Okay, let's see. Oh, a super chat. How very nice. Well, thank you, Adam Toast, for the super chat. What are your thoughts on Agile, especially in terms of big tech versus open source development? Positive vibes from Germany. Well, thank you from Germany. So I don't have that much experience with Agile. We did do some of it at the last job that I had, but my manager didn't really take it seriously. It was more like he was told from his manager that now you should do Agile, and he told him yes, and then we just kind of didn't do it anyway. I think that sometimes these kind of systems seem really good to me if you have a large group of people that are motivated by something other than personal interest or personal passion. So if people are motivated, for example, by getting a paycheck or by getting career advancement and things like that, then you often need some kind of structure in order to get them to do things that move the project forward. When it comes to open source development, I don't think that such things are necessary because people are driven by other things like passion or curiosity. And I would like to avoid involving this type of processes as much as possible. But then again, as I was saying, I have quite little experience. I've only done this a very little bit, so maybe it is better than it seems to me. Let's see. Blishko says, how do you profile a specific process? Specifically, I would like to profile chess engine. Okay, so let's look at how to profile a specific process in Serenity. Now we're talking a very oops, I can't compile this program. I was saying now we're talking about a very specific technical question finally. So let me get rid of that test program I wrote, and we'll try to build again. Okay. So the way that you profile specific programs, there are two main ways to engage the profiler. You can engage it by providing a command that you want it to run. So you do that with profile-c. For example, you can say profile-c ls, and then it will run ls completely profiled. And when it's finished, it will spit out this thing called a perf core. And then the perf core can then be opened with the profiler program, which crashes if we try to look at it because we have some kind of bug. Fantastic. Okay, well, I don't know what that's about. That's one way of doing it, though. Let's see if it's something. Why are you crashing? Recompute histograms if needed. That doesn't sound very good. Let's try something that's a bit longer running than usually. It might be that we didn't get a very interesting profile. Profile browser startup. And okay, there we go. So profile-c gives you a perf core, and that's one way of doing it. But when it comes to something like Chess Engine, which runs in the background and it's sort of spawned when you spawn the chess program, what you might want to do instead is you can use a profile with a PID. So you get the PID of the chess engine, and then you can profile that by saying -p44 and then E for enable. And then you would like cause it to do something. Make a move maybe, there we go. And then -d for disable. Now profiling is turned off. And since Chess Engine is still running, it doesn't produce a perf core. When Chess Engine exits, it will produce a perf core file. But maybe you want to look at the profile before that. And the way you do that is you go to the proc directory for 44. So proc 44. And here is a perf events file that you can copy out. Or you can actually just open it in the profiler right away. And that's how you get to it. So now we have a profile of this guy computing that first knight move. Okay, so I feel like I fell behind a bit here. Let's catch up. Let's see. Goodkid says, Andreas, can I have this wallpaper? Yeah, sure, I'll put it somewhere. I'll put it somewhere after the after we finish. So let's see. James Pulio says, what was the specific problem with using precompiled headers? If I recall correctly, they were implemented and enabled by default, and then not enabled by default and then removed. What went wrong? The problem we had with precompiled headers was with Ccache. So basically everybody who works on Serenity uses Ccache to speed up incremental rebuilds, because we do a lot of incremental rebuilds every day. And when we had PCH enabled, it caused Ccache to just reject every caching attempt. So what is the thing? -S for stats, right? So there is something here. Yeah, this error right here. Can't use precompile header. So we didn't even notice this at first, but Ccache just kept failing over and over and over and just racking up. So this is how many times I compiled thinking I was using Ccache, but it was actually failing because of the precompiled headers. So we couldn't quite work out how to make Ccache work correctly without causing strange errors. So in the end, we ended up removing the PCH instead. I think also the person who originally added PCH support said that it only gave him like 1% or 2% of improvement or something like that. All right, Valtteri says, is there a way to make it not ask a password when generating the disk image? I remember reading some discussion on it, but I forget the conclusion. Right, so that's a constant thorn in everybody's side. Obviously, we would love it if you didn't have to provide your password when you generate the disk image. There are a couple of different approaches to avoid it. All of them are irritatingly slower than the authenticated option that you get when you generate the password. So what we do with the password is that we mount the disk image and then rsync files into it. And that is very fast. And then there are a bunch of different commands that build an ext2 file system without root access and just build it into a file. And they're all much, much slower than letting the kernel do it. So if you want to, there is code in the build image QEMU script. If you want to use genx2fs, I think you can set this to 1 here, and it will use genx2fs instead of sudo and mount. But it's disabled by default because it is just so slow. Okay, ooh, super chats. Let's catch up here. Calculated risk taker, thank you for the super chat. Says, how does a binary executed on the kernel's stack? Meaning, when you execute a binary, how is it entering the fetch, decode, execute loop of CPU and coming out? So I'm not sure I understand the question, how a binary is executed on the kernel's stack. The kernel's stack, just like every stack in the system, is not executable. But I guess you're talking about like how do we start executing a program when you tell the system to run it. So for example, if I say /bin id, how do we start actually executing the code from the id binary? Okay, so if that's the question, then we can talk about that. So the way that we start loading binaries is in the exec syscall. So like every Unix, we also have exec syscalls. And to start a new process, you do the usual thing where you fork, and then you get a clone of your current process. And in the clone, also known as the child process, you do an exec syscall, which replaces the current program with another program. And that's the foundation for launching commands on Unix. And the exec syscall, what it will do is that it will take a path and then load that file that it points to, and then interpret it as an ELF executable. So ELF is the standard executable format used on many systems, Serenity included. And basically, the ELF format, we can look at it actually. So we have a readelf program that we can see here. So the important details, this is what the kernel looks at. These are the headers of the bin ID program. And they tell the kernel what to do about this binary. So in this case, it says that it's a dynamically linked program that has an interpreter in userlibloader.so. And then it also wants it to load some data from the executable into memory. In 2 cases actually, and they have different permissions, I think. So one of them is like read and execute, and the other one is read and write. And that's basically what we do. So we load the parts of the executable that are specified here in the headers, and then we start executing at the so-called start address, or the entry point, sorry, that's what's specified here. So this number right here, the entry point, that tells you where exactly in the executable to jump once you've loaded it somewhere into RAM. You know, this is obviously like, there's a lot more detail to this, and we could talk about it forever, but we implement pretty standard ELF loading, and we have a dynamic loader that takes care of pulling in shared libraries. So It's very similar to how it works on other Unix systems like Linux or BSD. Let's see. Austin says, do you have a recommended code style guidelines? Well, we have the coding style document here. These are our coding style guidelines that we use. And everybody is expected to conform to them, and we also require use of Clang format, or the CI will refuse your patch. Okay, so Ganesh, thank you for the super chat. Ganesh says, what is a good starting point to implement emulator? Did you use any specific resource while developing Computron? So the good starting point to implement an emulator, that's a question I like. So what I did when I very early, when I first started building my first emulator, I had no idea what to do. What I did was, I'll show you what I did. I'll recreate it. So imagine that I want to make a new emulator, and this is going to be an x86 emulator. Then what I would do back in 2003 was I would create a little test program like this. It would say something like add AXBX. Just some assembly instruction. I would assemble that with NASM, and then wait, how do you do that again? I forget. Right, I would end disassemble to see what it looked like, disassembled, and then I would grab the Intel documentation, so the Intel x86 manual. I'm sure I have this on my hard drive somewhere, but I forget where it is. Let's open that. Then I would grab this big document and look up the add instruction. Glook, glook, glook. And then by reading the manual, try to figure out, okay, so how did this become this? And then what does that mean? Okay, fine. And then from that point, try to write a sort of a C or C++ program that would turn this into this. That's sort of where I started. And actually, when I built the user space emulator for Serenity, I started in a very similar way, because the first thing I did was write a disassembler. And then we used the disassembler foundations to build an emulator out of that. So that would definitely be my recommendation. But you can approach it in any way that's natural to you. I think the important part is getting familiar with this document. If you're building an Intel emulator or an x86 emulator, if you're building any other kind of emulator, you want to get familiar with the technical documentation for that platform. This was definitely my main resource for building my emulator. Okay, let's see. U1 says, what are your thoughts on adding something like mock and language bindings for userland libraries so they can be used from the JavaScript interpreter? So I think that's a very fun idea, and it's something that Linus has investigated in the past. So Linus did this project called the libjs bindings, where he essentially allowed you to interact with the GUI and core libraries from JavaScript. And I'm a fan of that. I think that's really cool. And I think that's something that we could explore again in the future. So this repo is over a year old. It clearly is not going to work with current libjs. But I think we can revisit this at some point. We should revisit this at some point, because I think it could be a really good utility. Let's see, Grihash says, what do you recommend, C or C++ for exploit development? I don't think that matters. I guess I always recommend C++ because it's more convenient than C. But any low-level language where you can control bits and bytes. Because for exploit development, you want to control, at least for binary exploitation, you need control. So you want something low-level. let's see. Nikita says, is there any possibility to convert strings to integers? For example, 88 to 88. Did not find stoy. Yeah, we definitely have APIs for that. If you use our string class, for example, we have toInt. So string has toInt. And imagine that you have a string like we do right here, then you could call toInt on it. The int. And I think it returns an optional, actually. So you have to check if it has a value before you actually try to use the integer. But that's the API. Let's see. Joshua says, you should write a book about operating system development. I don't know if I should. I'm just going to write an operating system instead. Radiant Mango says, can you show how a system call executes, especially where and how the context switch to the kernel happens? Yeah, sure, I can do that. Let me just call out this super chat here. Thank you very much, Arjun, for this super chat. 19-bit 0383. I don't know the significance of that or if it's part of your nickname, but thank you for the super chat regardless. Yeah, so let's look at how system calls execute. They all enter the kernel in syscall.cpp, which is in the kernel root directory. And they enter through, depending on if you're on x86 or x86-64, they enter in through one of these two assembly routines. So this is the 64-bit one. And as you can see, this one is called Syscall asm entry. This is where all syscalls come in from user space. And I'll show you how we set that up right here. So syscall initialize, it's in the namespace syscall. Let's start from the beginning. Syscall initialize. So syscall initialize is called during boot. So this is in the init part of the kernel, which is like all the initial setup. Eventually, once we've set up some stuff like memory management, networking, blah, 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 then we finally enable syscalls. And what that means is that we register a user callable interrupt handler. And we provide this function pointer. And this is this function right here, the one that I was just showing you. So we register, I think it's hex82, syscall vector. Yes, hex82. And what that means is that you're writing an assembly program, for example, then you would do an int hex82, and this will call a syscall. And if you're on x86, you would put the number of the syscall you want to call in EAX. So to call syscall 40, you would just do this. And we enter in the kernel where I was just showing you. And what we do is we push a bunch of stuff on the stack to make sure that we have an image of the state before we enter the kernel. And then we save that away so that we can look at it. And then we basically end up down here in this function called syscall handler. This is where we enter into the kernel. And the first thing we do here is a bunch of checking and validation. And I actually forget what this stuff is about. I think this is about killing the, if you have a thread that dies while it's, when it's returning from a syscall, and then we want it to die before returning to user space, then we handle that here. Right. If a process dies while it's handling a syscall, then we let it finish, and then at the point where we're going to return from the syscall to user space, then we kill it. There's a bunch of stuff about that. But yeah, this is basically where it enters. So kernel syscall.cpp, you can definitely go and look at that. Jack Smith says, how do you know where to start with this project? I just started with a bunch of random things, and then I mashed them together to make an operating system. So if you go to SerenityOS.org and look at the Happy First Birthday page, you can see some screenshots of the first things that I did. So what I started with was a simple utility library an elf loader, an ext2 file system parser, and a GUI toolkit using SDL on Linux. But these are just little things I was curious about, and I was doing them independently until I realized that, hey, I can put these together and make a system out of it. Let's see. Quaker says, what are your thoughts on getting some cert compliance into certain parts of the code to guard against arithmetic overflow and underflow? Maybe running through a static analyzer. I'm a big fan of static analyzers. I think if we could run more of them, that would be better. So I'm all for it. I'm not necessarily all for these kind of draconian best practices bundles, but I'm not familiar with cert compliance, so I don't know what's included in that. But usually when I've looked at these kind of like, oh, these are our bundle of best practices, they are full of things that get in your way, and then a couple of nuggets of good stuff. So we would need to pick out the good stuff nuggets and not maybe not get all the irritating stuff. Let's see. Oh wow, so many questions here. Alex says, I remember that you used to run QEMU with very little memory as an artificial constraint. Have the RAM requirements increased in the meantime? What are acceptable minimum requirements in your opinion? So I still run QEMU with relatively low memory. Right here, you can see that it is 1 gigabyte at the moment, which I feel like that changed recently. When did I change that? Oh, right, it's on this branch. It's supposed to be 512. That's what made me react. Yeah, I'm on my special video hacks branch here, which has a bunch of hacks to make some buffers bigger, including I also make the memory bigger. And the reason I do that is because I was paranoid at one point that I would profile something and it wouldn't capture all of the events because I ran out of memory. And then I would lose out on a really good profile while making a video. That's why that commit is on the branch. But normally, we run with 512 megabytes, so half a gig. I think, in my opinion, that's a very reasonable minimum requirement for the system. But it is unusual to find a machine with that little memory. And I think that while I would like to have it as a minimal requirement, because I think there's no reason that the system shouldn't be able to boot on 512. I do think that we should get good at taking advantage of more memory when present. Stepan says, what's stopping you from switching to SerenityOS as your daily driver? The problem is that my host Linux system is more convenient to use at the moment. When that balance changes, I will switch. Let's see. Salvatore says, in the first episode, you showed us a little bit of how libgui works. It would now be super interesting if you could explain how a single pixel gets actually drawn on screen. Okay, that's a fun question. Okay, fine. So let's talk about that. How a pixel ends up on screen. It actually depends on which frame buffer driver you're using. But let's imagine that you are using the QEMU fake VGA card. So basically how that works is during startup, we look for video cards. So let's see. Oh, I haven't hacked on this for a while. Graphics management. Oh, right. This has become a bit oopified. But let's see. determine and initialize graphics device. Right, so what we do here is we look for a PCI device that has an identifier that we recognize. So the ones that we know about today are the box graphics adapter, which is the sort of the default VGA compatible thing in QEMU. There's also some initial support for Intel native graphics, the Intel GPU stuff, and we also have support for VirtIO, which is a virtualization specific thing that QEMU supports as well for fast graphics. And the way that these work is that, or at least let's talk about this one because this is the one I most recently looked at. The way the box graphics adapter works is that all the screen memory is just laid out somewhere in the physical memory space. So the physical memory space is completely distinct from virtual memory space, right? Physical memory typically is like all of your physical RAM takes up so much space, however much RAM you have. And then you also have other stuff like graphical frame buffers and other stuff that might be available like memory mapped I/O. And this graphics adapter shows up as physical memory. So you just have to ask the graphics card, hey, where in the physical memory space is your memory area? And depending then on well, the first thing is it will just tell you where it is, and then you can map that into virtual addresses and then write to that, and then that just makes stuff show up on screen. And it also depends on what resolution you use and what kind of pixel format and stuff, but we use the simplest possible format, which is just RGBA, 4 bytes per pixel. So every pixel is a 32-bit value, and then you can just update it, write to any of these values on screen, or write to any location on screen by updating that 32-bit value in memory. And in Serenity, Windows Server does all of this. So the Windows Server compositor class, let's see if we can find that. Compositor. Composite, compose. This function is what actually draws into this big bitmap in memory that was mapped. But there's a huge stack of things in between, of course. But the important thing to know is that it's just one big memory area, and it's 32 bits per pixel. So once you have it set up like that, it's quite easy to draw the pixels. Let's see. Andy said, oh, it got skipped again. I don't know what that means, but sorry about that. Andrew Gabriel says, what is the code coverage currently for SerenityOS? I don't know. I haven't done any kind of coverage analysis. Colin Foster says, hi, I wonder, do you have any suggestions to people who want to get involved in the system programming? I'm a college student now, and I'm so excited about what you did. If you want to get involved with system programming, I recommend working on systems. And depending on your experience level, if you are a new programmer or relatively new, I would recommend building something by yourself first, like an emulator is a really good way to get started with systems. But you can also join an ongoing systems project if you are intermediate or more advanced in your programming skills. Let's see. HuskyNet says, I'm thinking about porting Serenity to RISC-V. I've seen much assembly in the code, but I still think I could do this. What are your thoughts about this? Go for it. Let's see. Andrew says, can you run OBS in Serenity? No, you cannot. Not yet. Rudy Sundar says, is this OS about only 90s user interface, or is there any other advantage to it? This is a this is a funny question. Yes, it is about much more than a 90s user interface. I suggest you have a look around the system and see if you can figure out what else is special. Jack Smith says, what is your background? Do you have CS training? I assume you are a self-taught developer who studied a lot of OS books. You seem very knowledgeable. So I am a high school dropout. I don't have any formal CS training. So I'm definitely self-taught. Did not read many OS books. I read half of Andrew Tannenbaum's Minix book, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. But I was never a big book reader. But I've learned most or the majority of my skills I've learned by participating in open source projects and working together with people who are very knowledgeable about random things. And I'm also very curious, and I like to build like miniatures and scale models of things in code. So I have learned a lot by doing that. Arthur says, hi Andreas, curious, what are the positive consequences with working on SerenityOS full-time that you could not predict before going full-time, if you get what I mean? That's a good question. So I guess something I didn't predict before is that I would feel a lot less stressed. So I was a lot more stressed about my job than I realized, and now that I don't have to worry about that, it allows me to focus on Serenity stuff without stressing at the same time that I should be doing something else as well. And it has been a huge relief. And maybe I should have predicted it, but I think I was in denial about how much I was stressing while I was doing Serenity and a job. And I almost feel like, I feel a little bit like I'm doing as much Serenity as I did before now, except now I don't feel stressed at all while doing it. So I would love it if it stays that way and I don't get stressed, but we'll see. I mean, obviously I don't want to be stressed. So I'll have to work to make sure that that doesn't happen too much. But it's a good question though. Saint Ranger says, how do you feel about free and open source software extremism? I think that is extremely counterproductive, and if you're shouting at people, then you're never going to convince anybody by shouting at them. You're just showing off to your friends. Andy says, any opinions on FreeBSD jails? No opinions whatsoever. Isaac Pattison says, just passing by to say hi, hope you had a great another week on working on Serenity. Really good to see you focus on this project after following you for a long time. Cheers. Well, thank you, Isaac. I'm also really glad to be able to focus on this so much. Let's see. Austin says, could you explain the generate T idiom? What is that? What generate T idiom? Used in libjs. I don't know what that means. Generate. Is it this thing? Or I don't know what that refers to. Yuval says, is there a reason Assistant uses JavaScript for calculations, or is it just a temporary hack until there is a better way to do math calculations? It was just the easiest way to get a calculator expression evaluator. There's no particular reason outside of that. Spencer, the guy who is implementing the Assistant stuff, he just wanted to get something that could run basic expressions, so super easy. Maybe we should replace it with something else. I don't know. We'll see. Casper says, hey son, tangent to frame buffer memory mapping, what about hardware accelerated rendering? Are there any drivers for, say, Vulkan? No, we don't have any Vulkan drivers or anything like that at the moment, but it's something that we could do in the future if somebody works on it. Game Fan says, do you think you will add a package manager? Blah, blah, blah. I refer you to the frequently asked questions page in the pinned comment. Ganesh says, where is the code of Bootloader in the SerenityOS GitHub repo? So we don't have a bootloader at the moment in the system, but we use the multi-boot protocol. And what that means is that we interface with an existing bootloader, and then it tells us, okay, here is sort of the memory layout of the machine, and I've loaded you at this address, and please start running. And it's a simple bootloader protocol. And where we enter into where we start execution in our kernel is in kernel arch x86 common boot.s. So we enter, I think, down somewhere here. Start. And there is currently some work underway on building a sort of a pre-kernel environment. Gunnar is working on that. He's making not quite a bootloader, but something that runs before the kernel. Let's see. Nate says, hi Andreas, really appreciate these videos. I've changed the way I code after watching you program. Serenity's everything in one place style is very helpful, plus where I'm moving with my projects. Well, I'm glad to hear that you found some positive impact on your own programming style. I also really like having everything in one place. It makes it really pleasant. Let's see, did I miss something here? Sonalika says, why did you choose the name SerenityOS for your operating system? It is from the, as KP says down here, from the Serenity prayer. I learned the Serenity prayer while I was in rehab. And when I came out of rehab, I wanted to work on something. I wanted to start a really serious project for myself. And I chose to name it Serenity so that I would always be reminded of the Serenity prayer. Let's see, Nate Rush says, how do you think about in-code documentation / comments? Much of the Serenity codebase is light on comments, and I'm wondering if you have a rule of thumb when to use. So yeah, it is light on comments. In my experience, comments don't add as much as some people want to believe. And you can get basically everything you get from comments, or 90% of what you get from comments, you can get by using expressive names instead. Although here is a huge comment, but I didn't write that. So let's see, what could we look at? For an example, let's look at libgui widget. So everything in the system strives to have really self-explanatory names. Like these are all bad examples. Set fill with background color, something like that, right? Like these very long names. And if we're using long and expressive names like this, then you don't really need to say, you know, this will enable filling with the background color or whatever, because everywhere you use this API, you know that, oh, it will fill with the background color. And oh, here's a good example. Spans the entire window horizontally. I like that. So it tells you that the widget spans the entire window horizontally. So far, nobody who works on the system actively for a while complains about the comments. It tends to be something that people who, when they first see the project and they look around and they say like, oh, where are all the comments? And then after somebody has hacked on it for a week or so, they stop asking about that. And they notice that, oh, well, everything is named in a way that I can understand what it does. As far as a rule of thumb, I don't really have I don't really have a good catchy way of saying it. Maybe that's something I should think about. I feel like I really fumbled that answer, but anyway, let's see. Oh, wait, there's a super chat from C++ Weekly with Jason Turner. Well, thank you, Jason, for the super chat. You forgot to write a message, but thank you. Nice to see you here. Antoine says, what did you major in college? I never went to college. I left before finishing high school. Jack says, I'd love to know what you have planned for the future or what things you would like to implement. I have no idea what I would like to implement. We'll see. Let's see. Thoughts. Jonathan says, thoughts on OOP versus DoD. So object-oriented programming versus data-oriented design. Well, I haven't done that much data-oriented design in practice, but I can see that it has some merit, of course. Like cache locality is impactful. So if you have something that would heavily benefit from like rewriting so that it specifically targets cache locality, then I think that's a very useful technique. But I'm not at all convinced that you should write your entire program based around cache locality optimization. I think that's sort of that to me feels like premature optimization. Because object-oriented programming allows you to express much more naturally relationships between things and object models and ownerships and things like that, whereas data-oriented models, to me, they seem like, well, this is really tightly optimized, but it's also very exposed. Like the abstraction is very exposed, and it seems to me more like an optimization technique than a way to write programs. But maybe I should try it more sometime. Is Jason Turner here to review the code? Well, that would be fun. Jason, you are cordially invited to review the code. Nico says, how's the transition to full-time Serenity going? Do you try to have a fixed schedule? Are there more bookkeeping things like tax paperwork, or are these mostly sorted out? The transition is good. I do try to have somewhat of a fixed schedule, but there is a lot more paperwork than I expected. So I've been starting my own business. I'm still starting my own business. My latest things that I sent into the government were rejected with some silly reasons, so I have to refile a bunch of paperwork. But it is just like back and forth with these state things. But it's really nice. Like I've been enjoying it so far, and I feel more productive, and I feel more able to tackle sort of longer spanning projects. So in the last week, for example, I've been working on these low-level things. Like I wrote a new physical memory allocator. Wait, where is that? Physical zone? Why doesn't it find anything today? Oh, wait, am I on a really old branch? Oh, is that why everything's so weird? Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, I wrote a new physical memory allocator for the kernel. There we go. So it is called the physical zone, and it's a binary buddy allocator that has much better big O runtime than the old linear scan bitmap based allocator. And things like this, where I had to like sit down and think about how something should work, I found that a lot harder to do in the past, because if I had to do something that would span a longer time, I don't know, I would sort of run out of steam and have to get back to work. And I find this type of thing much easier to do now. So I've been doing a lot of that. Anyways, let's see. Oh, the Sympagen sends a super chat. Thank you very much, the Sympagen. And also Eduardo Costa, thank you. I was having a bad day, and this stream brought some light to it. Thanks for the inspiring work. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your bad day, man. I hope that we can talk about something interesting to light up your day. Let's see. Alex says, love your content. I know you tend to work on things that happen to catch your interest at the moment. Any idea when it might be browser hacking? I love those. I don't know. Maybe we should do some browser hacking soon. Right now, I'm in total kernel hacking mode. And I should make some videos about that. But I have just been hacking away on stuff, forgetting about the time. I really never know when I'm going to make a video about any given subject. I just, as you say, like I just do whatever catches my interest. But I will definitely get back to browser hacking sooner or later. Jack says, how much wall clock time does a window repaint usually take? I don't actually know, but certainly in the range of a millisecond or so. Like less than 16 milliseconds for sure, because we're easily doing 60 FIPS if we try to. Joel says, previously you mentioned the mechanism in macOS that you wanted in Serenity that steals memory from running processes, and it sounded whack. So I must have misunderstood it. Could you explain that? Okay, so what I was talking about is this concept in Darwin, or macOS and iOS, that's called purgable memory. And this is something we have in Serenity now. So this was very previously. So the way purgable memory works is that you allocate, let's get let's get an editor. You allocate a piece of memory. So allocate memory. Oops. And then you put something in that memory. No, this is a stupid way of explaining it. What you do is you allocate memory, and that memory has a flag. And it's a magical flag, and it's called a volatility flag. If your memory is volatile, that means that your bytes are in there, but at any moment they can disappear. So the only way that you can be sure that they don't disappear is by unsetting the volatile flag. And you do that by telling the kernel, make this memory non-volatile. And from that point, that memory is like any other mmap memory in your process. But while it is volatile, the kernel can just come and take it if it needs it, because it's under memory pressure or something like that. And let's see, purgable memory. This is a thing on other systems. Windows has it as well. macOS has it. I think Android has it, but mainline Linux doesn't. Basically, it just allows you to have something large, and then you can tell the kernel, if you take this away, that's okay. Just let me know if you do. And then what happens is, the next time you try to set it to non-volatile again, the kernel will tell you, okay, now it's non-volatile. By the way, I took it while you were not using it. And then that's your signal that you have to sort of rebuild whatever was in there, because it's just zeros now. That's how that works. Kyle says, my opinion on comments are that they should be used to explain why a particular decision was made, or idiosyncrasies of the system that are not plainly obvious. Yes, I completely agree with that. They should explain why and what might be idiosyncratic. Very, very well put. Reynold with the super chat saying, great stream. Thank you, Reynold. Thank you for being here. German WTB with the super chat saying, your off-the-cuff opinion on things like IPFS. This is going to become very off the cuff, because I have to look up what that means. IPFS, the Interplanetary File System. Okay, so peer-to-peer for storing and sharing data, content addressing, global namespace. Implementations, blah, 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 used for what? My off-the-cuff opinion is that it sounds like a tech project, research project, and I think BitTorrent was such a great idea when that came out, because that really gave us something that was missing before. And I have been wondering sometimes, like, what is the sort of the spiritual successor of BitTorrent? Like, what comes after in that train of thought or train of evolution? And based on my, you just saw me learning everything I know about this, so I don't know. I'm glad that people are investigating that type of stuff, but it's not something that interests me in particular. Let's see. Owen says, "Hey Andreas, I'm in high school and I came across Serenity not too long ago, and it's what's inspired me into low-level systems development, and I decided to work on an OS project myself." Cool. That's great. I am very happy for you that you are in high school and already doing development projects and feeling interested in this type of stuff, low-level development. I'm always happy to see young people getting into low-level stuff. Oops. All right. German says, "Don't feel obligated to have a perfect answer for just $2. Well, I did what I could. Apocalypse X says, "Andreas quit his job to work in the based department." Yes, I quit my job in the cringe department, and I now work in the based department. Is that how it goes? See, Noah says, "Is some of the application code using custom allocators? That's often an easy way to improve locality if you know more about your data than the kernel malloc." Right. So almost all programs in Serenity use standard malloc from libc. The one exception to that, or the one main exception, is libjs, which uses a customized allocator for the garbage collected heap. So the heap in libjs has this concept called a heap block allocator, and it allocates, I think, the 16 kilobyte blocks at a time. I forget how large they are actually. That's not the most important thing. 16 kilobytes at a time, and then chunks them up and keeps track of, or has a way to keep track of, like, which blocks are marked and which ones are unmarked and stuff like that. So GC specific stuff. But outside of libjs, really everybody uses malloc. There have been some things recently that made me think we should build a basic arena allocator, for example. Situations where you have like a lot of allocations that sort of live and die together, and an arena allocator would be a really useful thing to have for stuff like that. Ian says, "I am looking to implement getRUsage in libc. Is just reading proc all a reasonable approach?" It might be. I mean, offhand, I don't know everything that is supposed to be returned by getRUsage. Is that a POSIX thing in the first place? POSIX. Oh, not you, Linux. Okay, this sounds POSIX-y. So, basically, you want to expose the information through proc, I think, and if proc all has everything you need, then you can use that. If you need something else, you can add new nodes in the proc file system to expose the information that you need. And it's very likely that the information you need does not exist yet, so you have to actually compute it or collect it or whatever. Jason Manuel says, hello, Andreas. Hello, Jason. Eyesight, which is the second programming language you are good at after C++? Oh, I don't know. I almost hesitate to say, but I guess I would have to say JavaScript at this point because I've spent a lot of time learning it while implementing it. At the same time, I constantly discover things, really basic things about JavaScript that I didn't know. So I almost feel silly saying that I am good at it. Really, my knowledge of JavaScript is more like I know a lot of details and I have a blurry big picture. So I don't know. But it's probably the thing I write the second most of. Anyway, HuskyNet says, oh, he's asking somebody else, not me. Raphael says, passing by to congratulate on the amazing work done so far. Keep up. All right, thanks, Raphael. We will. Shantanu says, how feasible would it be to re-implement SerenityOS in C? I wouldn't recommend that. Kevin Band says, hey Andreas, I'm 3 years old and SerenityOS has inspired me. Well, you may be the youngest user of this system, and you spell amazingly for a 3-year-old. Let's see. Adrian says, thoughts on alternative file systems like ZFS or BetterFS. Snapshotting might be useful, especially at some point you actually switch to Serenity. So I don't have, I've never been a big like file system person. I'm barely aware of what the different new features are. But I certainly welcome good features, good stability, good performance, those type of things. And these are probably things that we can look into supporting in Serenity as well. At the moment, I think the important thing is making the kernel and file system implementation stable rather than trying to extend it with support for more different types of file systems or different features. Because we have like basic stability issues that we're looking into at the moment. I've been looking into a lot of deadlock issues in file systems, for example. Just last night I fixed like 5 deadlocks or something. Very basic deadlocks, and I feel like until we have the locking story figured out for our main file system, we don't want to complicate things by adding more file systems without even understanding how we want synchronization to work. Let's see. Jacob says, hi Andreas, would it be possible to port C-Line to Serenity? Yeah, I guess so. You would need a Java runtime, I guess. Ali says, implementers JavaScript is not at all a working web developer's JavaScript. It certainly is not. Let's see. Buzz says, at what point does the kernel switch from assembly to C to C++, or does it not work like that? So we go from assembly to C++ directly. There's no C involved. And in boot.s, which is the assembly code, wow, this is completely, the highlighting here is all wrong. But basically this thing will just jump to init right here with a call instruction when it's done setting everything up. So an init is a function here in C++. This guy right here. So we jump from assembly to this C++ code. El Cucus says, what is your most/least favorite subproject of the Serenity ecosystem? I don't know. I don't really have like a most and least favorite subproject. What I do have is like the thing that I'm obsessing about right now, or the thing I'm the most interested in right now, and then everything else. And that's just how I'm like I tend to focus on one thing at a time, and like spend a lot of time on it, and then I just move on to something else. And everybody has their own approach to it. Let's see. Eduardo says, Java runtime, is it a thing in Serenity? No. Somebody did start on a, was it an OpenJRE runtime port or something like that? But I think it was abandoned because it turned out to be a lot of work. But it did result in a bunch of patches. I think it was Ali who started on that. Anyway, it's just software. Like, if software exists and we have the source code, we can get it to run eventually. It just takes work. Michael Losh says, you seem to have a great team, but are there some skills or areas or knowledge you think need to be improved over time? Yes, definitely. We have a great team, and I think we're all improving by working on this project. That's certainly something I've noticed, that I've improved so much while working on this, and so has everybody else. Everybody who contributes to Serenity and has been doing it for the last, over the last year or so, and before that also, I've seen huge improvement in everybody. And it's really, really fantastic. When it comes to are there skills and areas we need to improve? Yes, all of them. We need to improve in all areas for sure. And right now I've been doing a lot of kernel work personally, and therefore my gut feeling is that, oh man, we really need to improve our kernel skills, because I see sort of all the flaws in the area where I'm currently working. But there are flaws in every area, and we can all improve them. But like I always say, I want people to work on this because they enjoy it, because they're interested. So it's okay with me if it takes a bit longer and we wait for that person who's really interested in something to come along and work on it, because I think we're all better off for that. The Raytar says, hi Andreas, what is your strategy for handling errors in Serenity? I asked this earlier, but I think you missed it. The strategy for handling errors. Well, we don't use exceptions. So what we normally do instead is we use some kind of result class. So in the kernel, we have kResult. We have kResult OR, and this is sort of an either type. So you would return a kResult or something else. So you have a function that looks like this, maybe kResult or int my API. And then it gives you back this object, and you can ask it, hey, are you a result or are you an error? I think that's what you ask. Oh, you ask if it's an error, right. So we have these return types that are either an error code or some type of value, like an arbitrary templated value type. Benoit says, for how long have you been in live? I'm on phone and I can't see it for unknown reasons. I've been live for 1.5 hours. Rider Hitchhike says, what do you think people talking about how this new language is the panacea and everyone should rewrite everything in it? I think people should maybe calm down a little bit and focus on their own projects instead of telling other people what to do. Shantanu says, can I submit C-only code-based things for SerenityOS? No, we don't accept C code. Adrian says, how do you decide what is part of the system and needs to be implemented versus what needs to be ported? For example, why implement a web browser in the first place instead of porting a free one? I refer you to the frequently asked questions in the pinned comment. Yeah. Amay says, hey Andreas, when did you start programming? Big fan. So I started programming when I was very, very young. My parents tell me that I was 3 years old. I don't know if I believe that, but I was too young to keep track. So, but I did start very early. Definitely while I was in kindergarten, writing programs in GW Basic. Olaru says, is there a Python runtime in Serenity? Well, there's a port of Python. We don't have our own implementation of Python. Jagger says, hey Andreas, I wrote the Starfield screensaver, but it runs really poorly on slower hardware. Any ideas on how to speed things up? So I guess the best way you can speed that up is probably by not redrawing the entire screen. If you can figure out like which part needs to be repainted and then only repaint those parts, that would be great. Let's see. Let's see if we can use the flashy feature to expose how much we are repainting. And I should say that we're about to have some flashy action on the screen, so if you don't like that, I would recommend you look away for the next minute. It's gonna get flashy. Okay, so Starfield. Oh wow, that's very flashy, yes. So basically what that tells us is that your Starfield program was making the whole screen yellow, which means that it's repainting the whole screen over and over. And if you want that to run faster on slower hardware, you can speed it up by just only repainting the areas that actually change. And you're going to have to make your program a little bit more complicated to do that, of course, but that will definitely speed things up. Adam Toast says, what is your favorite word? I don't know. I really don't know. My favorite word. I don't know, I'll have to think about that. Aziz says, is using exceptions bad practice? I don't know. I just don't like them myself. I don't like subscribe to good practices, bad practices, this type of thinking, because it's like these things move like fashion. Whatever is good practices and bad practices today will be switched in a couple of years, and I try to keep us on our own path with Serenity, that we just ignore all these fashion things and just make what we think makes sense instead. I personally don't like using exceptions because I feel that they obscure control flow, so I don't use them in any. I used them in one of my projects and I regret doing it. But anyway. Eduardo says, hello, would you talk about the IPC mechanism used in Windows Server? So I talked about that quite a bit in the two live streams ago, where I was going into the libGUI and how it paints. But basically it's a local Unix socket where you have a client-side set of APIs and a server-side set of APIs, and then they can send these messages to each other. And they are just serialized, similar to like protobuf or something like that. So we have this domain-specific language that describes the various messages you can send back and forth. They look like this, and these just get serialized into byte streams and go as messages. I think if you want to hack on that, I would recommend like starting by just adding a message and like seeing what happens, because if you add a message here, then it will fail to build, and then you will notice like, oh, I have to add this now and that now. But if you have a more specific thing that you're trying to implement, then we can talk about that. Valtteri says, since I collect ancient computers and I find it interesting, a brief tour of your early computing hardware. So dude, I wish I remembered like the model names of everything I used as a child, but I do remember the very first computer I ever used. It was one of these things. This guy right here. So from 1987, Toshiba T1200, a fantastic machine. And my father brought it home from work. He was working for the government at the time, and they gave him this to do some bookkeeping or whatever. He had some DOS software for that, and it also came with BASIC. And that's where I started programming. But there were many other machines after that. All of them were laptops, by the way. We never had a desktop machine until much later. But I don't remember exactly which ones they were. Wallace says, "Hi Andreas, is this supposed to be a Q&A only series, or will you also do live programming?" So the office hours concept is what you're seeing here. Just a Q&A, anything goes, basically. And I don't try to program in this stream because I want to have this as an opportunity for people to bring any questions that they have, especially people working on the system, so they can just ask and we can talk about it interactively. But I might try to do live programming streams in the future, although I am skeptical that it would be possible to do anything of high quality that way. Because I notice myself, I get very distracted and excited by the interaction, and I don't know if I could focus on programming like this. The Ducklets says, "How's GPU support coming along?" I don't think anybody's really working on, if you mean hardware acceleration, then I don't think there's any work on that at the moment. But there has been some work on VirtIO GPU support to get better integration when running inside virtual machines. Minaj says, "You said C++, a book basically taught you C instead. Which books helped you later?" I don't read that many books, so I don't have any book recommendations. Although I can mention that the last book I actually bought was Jason Turner's C++ book. Because Jason put out a book a while back. Was it this one? 45-ish Simple Rules? I think that was it. That's the last book I bought, and I have not finished it yet. But Jason puts out good stuff. So I was curious about that. But I don't necessarily think that you need books. What you really need is practice. Anyway, Kevin says, "My favorite word is Serenity." Yeah, I'm leaning towards that as well. Edwin says, "How do you go about debugging? Assertions, logging, etc., and a general way of thinking?" So I'm a huge fan of assertions. I think if you can assert so much in your code that your program will tell you about the bugs before you even notice them otherwise, that's fantastic. As long as they don't get in the way of performance and readability, of course. But I'm a huge fan of assertions. But I would say, I think if you can like prevent a bug at compile time, that's absolutely the best thing. Second best thing is preventing it at runtime with assertions. And if you've seen me debug issues on this channel, then you know that I'm a frequent printf debugger. I don't use debuggers a lot unless I really have to, because I have some weird behavior, like I need to do a memory watch or something like that. But if I'm just debugging logic errors, I usually prefer to just log spam until I see what the problem is. And I know that different people feel differently about this, and I don't judge anybody else's way of working. The judgment tends to come in the printf direction and not out from it. But it works for me, so I like that. MVP Hurricane says, "This is awesome. You are awesome. SerenityOS is awesome. Thank you." Well, you're awesome too. Thank you. Boss says, if you could change one thing about C++ in an instant, what would you change and why? Ooh, if I could change one thing in an instant, I guess I would maybe like it if I could rebind references or even rebind local names, so that if I've null checked something, I would be able to promote a raw pointer to a raw reference. That would be really cool, by just rebinding the identifier. But I don't know. I could probably come up with a bunch of things, but I always feel like it's so annoying to me that when I have a pointer that I have null checked, that I still have to do the little arrow operator, because I know that it's not null. So why do you make me act like it might be? Anyway. Watkins R says, hey Andreas, not a question, but if you remember, I was the dude who didn't have a job for 2 years and I was complaining a lot. Now I have a job for quite a while, so thanks, man. Oh, dude, I remember you. I'm so glad you got a job. That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm glad that you got your stuff together and you got a job and you've been holding it down for a while. That's so good. Really good to hear. Thank you. And I mean, thank you for telling me, and congratulations. Kyra says, does a developer's mental health matter in the workplace? Yeah, of course. I mean, your mental health matters wherever you are. But I do think that it's your responsibility to take care of your own mental health, and you should probably not expect your employer to care about that for you. And it's important that you set boundaries between yourself and your employer, because at the end of the day, your employer is always going to do what's best for them, not what's best for you. So it's up to you to make sure that your mental health is taken care of. So I think it does matter, and I think it's up to each developer ultimately to secure their health. 101 says, is Ubuntu the best system in terms of toolchain? I don't know. I guess you mean, like, is it the easiest system to build Serenity on? It's certainly well tested. Like, I use it every day, so. But people have success on other systems. Linked Uno says, have you ever thought of using your low-level OS knowledge to fill in some of Wine's gaps? I am not particularly interested in working on Wine, so probably not. Ecoptics says, Andreas, how can someone learn parsing? By writing parsers. Just make parsers, dude. Let's see. Eber says, I always feel like my programming knowledge is too superficial. What are your tips to get deeper? My tips to get deeper is to participate in more serious projects, more like complex projects. If you always do little toy projects by yourself, you will eventually come out with a well-rounded knowledge, but you won't have like very detailed, deep knowledge about anything. And I think you get to a point where your general skill has become so good, but now you need to sort of choose something to specialize in a little bit so that you can learn that area better. So my tip for you would be to try and join some ongoing project or ongoing effort where they're doing something that's really interesting to you and is a lot more advanced than what you're currently used to. Something we have in Serenity, for example, which I find really cool, is the JavaScript engine, which it's now becoming like a more advanced project where you can see the interaction of a lot of complex systems, and there's like a big specification that we have to follow, and that's an example of a deeper place where you can definitely learn stuff. But really, you should just pick something that interests you and dive deep into that. But I guess the thing I'm trying to say is that you want to surround yourself with people who have deeper knowledge than you, so that you can absorb some of it from them. Austin says, why prefer East const? Because it looks correcter. Hype Rocket says, have we had a super chat train yet? Did I miss it? What is a super chat train? I'm not familiar with that term. So either you missed it or we didn't have it, but I don't know what it is. User says, do you believe a beginner should prioritize contributing to open source projects or starting their own from scratch? I believe beginners should absolutely do their own things. If you are a beginner, you can learn so much by just building your own things. It's only once you cross into more intermediate skill levels that you want to start interacting with projects, I think. And when I say beginner, I mean like first and maybe second year of programming. Once you get past that, then you know the world is your oyster. But when you're a beginner, you learn whatever you do. You're going to learn a bunch. So it's really optimal for you to just build many things by yourself, because then you can go really fast. But then it gets to a point where you have diminishing returns from just starting random projects over and over. But in the first year, that actually gives you returns. So I think that's the best to focus on. Sam Bauman says, hi Andreas, I love the Serenity project and I was wondering a bit how GML works. Is the GML baked into the executable and interpreted at runtime? Or is it compiled into its equivalent libgui calls? So right now, it's actually baked into the executable and interpreted at runtime. So, and the reason for that is simply to make it easier. But I always thought that if this becomes a performance problem, that we notice that, hey, this program takes a long time to start up because it's spending all of its time parsing GML or whatever, then we could do something about it. But like the text editor, for example, this is a program written in GML and it comes up just like that. So when we start the text editor, we parse the GML UI description and just generate the UI based on that and just poof. So it's probably something that if you wanted to do much more complex UI with like deep nested layouts and stuff, maybe it would be worth making a C++ generator. But at the moment, it just, we haven't seen anything remotely slow because of this. So Yanis says, just a super chat passing by. Well, thank you for the super chat, Yanis. That's very nice. Thank you. I really appreciate the super chats. They are very nice. So Sarfraz says, if SerenityOS grows like Linux, how will you separate drivers from the kernel? Linux has almost 30 million lines of code and mostly are driver related. I don't know. We will deal with scaling issues incrementally as we go. I think that it doesn't make sense to try to come up with a strategy right now for how are we going to deal with 30 million lines of code. And we are not, this project doesn't have the same goals as Linux. We're making this for very different reasons. So Linux is not really a good model for how we want to do things, both in code and in project management. But specifically, like how we deal with things is we deal with it as it comes to us. Young Sudo says, have you ever done some web development? Yes, I have. I used to work as a web developer in 2003 and 2004. Alex says, when you work on GUI applications, you often make them pixel perfect by adjusting the spacings in pixels. Does this scale nicely when Serenity is run with a different resolution? Well, not really, but the UIs don't scale. So in a way, it scales perfectly because some of the UIs are static. But Yeah, it is an issue for some situations, but I think even for our high DPI 2x mode, we still want to have the same kind of pixel perfect aesthetic, just doubled. So I don't know. I don't know about that yet. When I sit here and I put it in full screen on my monitor, it looks just absolutely crisp, beautiful, and I love the way it looks. And I don't know if we would want to support stuff like UI scaling or something like that, but it's not something that we have any thought put into at the moment. I've just made it look good in a way that I like. And then if somebody wants to make like a scalable version of the UI, that would be, I mean, it would be possible to steer things that way, but it's not something we're actively doing. Let's see, Walter says, with a fast system, 2 programs with orders of magnitude different runtime might feel just as responsive. Have you tried running QEMU at a slower speed to get a feel for performance issues? Yeah, I do that every now and then. I like to run QEMU without KVM enabled every other day, just to see what the situation is. And it's definitely a lot slower, but I don't know, I guess we can do that right away. So I usually just go and comment out the line about KVM here, and then we boot up Serenity without KVM, and then as you can see, it's very, very slow. Very, very, very slow. Poof. Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, we would have to profile it to see how much time it's actually spending in the GML parse. Oh, right. It's funny, when I run with KVM disabled, you can even see like the shell and the line editor lagging, like the cursor is flopping around back and forth. Ali keeps saying that he's going to improve that with something, but that's still to be determined. Okay, so now we got a perf core of loading. So let's see if we can look at that. Wait, that didn't work out. Okay, let's do this differently. Profile, everything, enable. We start a text editor. I just want to see how much time we're spending on the GML parse. Seems to be a bug or two in the profiling system. Like, I keep losing samples. Okay, so here's text editor. We select only that. And then let's do top. Okay, so load from GML is 12.2% of startup time. So it's definitely not nothing, and could be improved for sure. So yeah, I mean, you are right that on a slower machine, it might be more noticeable. It's definitely something that we could look into. The way that we load GML at the moment is really quite weird, because we parse it and then we turn it into a JSON blob for some reason, and then we give that JSON blob to the GUI system. So there's like a completely unnecessary, a temporary conversion to JSON, and I think if you remove that, you can save a bunch of time already. It's just like pointless busy work. Okay, so somebody asks again what keyboard I use. Ayub, I use this Logitech K740. Amal says, how did you make the switch from web dev to systems work? Don't employers need X years of experience in systems, languages, etc.? I don't know if they need anything in particular. I think I mean, I just applied for jobs and I got them. I never really thought too much about what they were asking for. Something a lot of people don't realize is that if you can get an interview somewhere, your qualifications don't matter too much at that point. Your qualifications are they're just something that you provide in order to get to interview. But once you get to the interview, you just have to convince them to hire you. And I applied for a lot of jobs that I wasn't like technically qualified for on paper, and I still got them because I did well in the interviews. Let's see, Italo says, do you think it would be better to write a JVM port or write a JVM or port OpenJDK to Serenity? Well, if I were doing it, which I'm not, and I don't care about Java, but I would obviously do a JVM instead of a port because like the whole spirit of the project is to build things ourselves, and ports are kind of a little bit boring. But they're also a lot easier, so if you just want to get something running, then doing a port is often easier. Ein Anton says, I really like this format. Can you go over how you handle paging in SerenityOS? We don't actually have enough time for that today to go into the paging, but we'll save that question for next time. We can talk about paging. Ali says, vaporware libline. Yeah, indeed. Eduardo says, Serenity without KVM looks better and faster than my old systems. Feel faster than my current systems as well. Yeah, I mean, it's still not that bad. Satusin says, Andreas, you need an FAQ for all the repeated questions. Then you can just link to it in the description. Bruh, there's an FAQ in a pinned comment in this chat. And it's linked in the description as well. At least I think so. I put it in there, although I don't know how to get to there from here. Anyways, there's supposed to be an FAQ. It's on my website, on my awesomecling.github.io/FAQ. But people still ask things again and again, and we've learned that some things need to be in the FAQ. Let's see. Marcus says, did you answer the question about Rust? Please read the FAQ. This question comes up 100 times every live stream, and it's in the FAQ. Let's see. Oh, wait. Ayub was asking, do you use X server in Serenity? No, we do not use an X server. We have our own thing. It's called Windows Server. There's no X11. Windows Server is similar to X11 in some ways, but it is also different in many ways. So it's like a simplified X11 almost, where and the client-side API is a bit more like Qt and less like a low-level C API. Let's see, German WTB. That's so hard to pronounce. Are you totally uninterested in high DPI yourself? And have you ever used a 4K display? Day to day, it's pretty nice. I'm not uninterested in it, but I have used a large display, and it is pretty nice indeed. Yeah, I guess at some point, I mean, so Nico started doing the high DPI originally, and it still needs a lot of love to get really good. So if nobody else picks it up, I'm gonna have to do it eventually. Like, that's my philosophy about everything in Serenity. Like, I'm just waiting for somebody to pick it up because they like it. But if nobody does and it's something that I want, then I will have to do it myself eventually. So that's fine. And high DPI is obviously one of those things because I have a big screen, so I would like to have high DPI support. So we'll see. Maybe somebody does it first, otherwise I'll get to it. Linus says, are you still using Apple hardware and software other than an iPhone? Not really, no. I only use the iPhone. I have a MacBook, but it barely boots anymore. The battery is dead, and it is silly. So I don't use anything. I do use the iPhone because I guess I like it, and I actually, like, I've seen the inside of the Apple privacy story, so I know that it's legit, whereas I don't trust the privacy story of any other phone vendor very much. But I don't also have like strong opinions about that. It is partly convenience and habit. Ajawad says, I know absolutely nothing about OS dev, but I love watching your videos so much. Well, if you watch my videos, then you will know stuff about OS dev eventually. That's inevitable. Yuval says, maybe you can write the link to the FAQ on screen. Yeah, that would have been a good idea. Why didn't I do that? Yeah, I should definitely put the FAQ down here or something, or yeah, I'll have to do that next time. Gluescop says, can we expect a cooking stream, fried vegetables and tofu, at 50K subscribers? Well, maybe. That does sound kind of nice. Jonathan says, in the spirit of writing everything, have you considered writing your own toolchain? Of course. And eventually we might do that. But at the moment, we are working on so many things already. But it seems perfectly likely to me that we would eventually replace the toolchain as well. It's just, it's not a deal breaker. It doesn't block anything. So it sort of gets put on the back burner. Valtteri says, MacBook Pro tip, clean the dust out from inside and replace the thermal paste. Yeah, I mean, I know I can do that, but I also don't really like using it. So it's a 2017 MacBook Pro, I think, or 2016. Whichever one where they switched to the horrible keyboard, it's that one. I never liked typing on it, and now that I've sort of migrated to using other systems, I don't feel in a hurry to make it work and get back to it. But I hear that the new ones have much nicer keyboards, so that's really good. Wouldn't the Librem 5 be better for your privacy? I wouldn't trust that. I have seen how Apple handles privacy, and I trust them with that, based on my inside knowledge. But I don't expect anybody else to trust them, but I do, at this point at least. Let's see. Oh. Radiant Mango says, you have shown the Windows Server flashy debug flag. Does Serenity have some other unusual performance trace mode? So something that many people maybe don't know about is, let me turn KVM back on actually. That we have the profiling system, right? And the profiler can actually also capture other types of events. So we have samples, which is what you normally see when you just do a regular time profile, but we can also capture context switches, page faults, kernel mallocs, and kernel freeze. And if you run profile with these, you can specify with -t which types of event you want, and then you can get profiles of page faults, for example, instead. Those are the main performance tools that we have. There are some other things I would like to add, but it's not something I'm actively working on. Right now, I guess I'm working on stability. Tim says, what is your opinion on the ongoing right to repair story? I don't have a strong opinion on that. Yvonne says, Apple sell data just as well as Google. You don't know what you're talking about. Jakarta says, hi Andreas, kudos for the great OS. Is there a plan to regularly build ISOs? No. 101 says, does Serenity have any hidden Easter eggs? No fun hidden gems. There are many hidden Easter eggs, if you will, in the code. They are quite well hidden. And I'm not going to tell you what they are because that would spoil the fun of finding them. But yeah, and then Ajwad says, what has been your absolute favorite laptop so far? Ooh, I don't know. I don't think I'm really a laptop person. I used to think I was, but now that I'm back at a desktop, I really enjoy it. But I guess maybe my favorite laptop that I had while in the Apple ecosystem was my 2012 MacBook Pro. It's a very sturdy thing. Anyways, oh shoot, look at the time. We have to wind down. So this is the end of office hours. Thank you all very much for coming and for asking all the questions and giving us stuff to talk about. I hope that I was able to cover some interesting stuff, and I think we have definitely learned some things that we need to improve for next time, like better visibility of the FAQ. And I will also mention that the FAQ is it's on my GitHub, so if somebody wants to contribute to it, you actually can, because it's right here. So it's just in the faq.md right here. So I definitely welcome if anybody wants to help out with improving the answers or stuff, so that we can better accommodate people who have these common questions, because I don't want to exclude anybody just because they have common questions. I just don't want to waste everybody's time answering the same things over and over. But you know that. So thank you all very, very much for coming to office hours, and I hope that we can continue developing the format. And thank you all again for tolerating that I experiment with you, but this is good. So we're gonna close out here, and thanks again for the super chats, folks, and everything else, and I will see you all next time.